A lot of people think, what or who is IFF? And that's what we call ourselves because the company really is International Flavors and Fragrances, and that's a lot to say. But I do want to say we're an innovative partner. We have a very robust portfolio, and we want to work with you and your company to help you be more efficient. And I think this week we've spoken a lot about efficiency and the many different ways you can look at that and be more efficient. Talking about IFF, I'm here in this part, DuPont, which was Danisco, and before that, Genencor. But if you look at IFF, it encompasses all of these products. And some of you may already be familiar with those products or have worked with them. And so my focus down here is with enzymes, distilling and brewing enzymes. And today I want to talk about gelatinization, which is actually just one step before where the enzymes would come into play here. So the importance about gelatinization is that you're buying starch in your raw materials, such as corn or wheat or rye and malt. But the yeast that you use to make ethanol or alcohol needs fermentable sugars. So in your cooker, that whole process is focused on turning that starch into fermentable sugars. And it takes 3 steps. Now the part is that gelatinization is a different temperature for each of the cereal grains that you use. And it's not just a single fixed point in time. There's a range of temperature for each one of these, for corn, malt, rye, and wheat. So you have a range of temperature for gelatinization, but that range also varies year to year. And that's the difficulty. You as a buyer have no idea what that gelatinization temperature is. And you think you can go out and find it, and you can find gelatinization temperature in reference books or on Google, but they're going to be all over the place. So I'll go through that. How would you actually determine the gelatinization temperature? And finally, we'll look at a case study. And this is particularly looking at rye, which is unique. And I realize there's a lot of different mashing programs and profiles out there. So this is not a one-size-fits-all, but hopefully today when you come out of here, you'll start thinking about gelatinization temperatures. How do I apply that to my brewery, and what are the implications? Because if the gelatinization temperature is too high, you need that temperature to gelatinize the starch so that you can get fermentable sugars. But if it's too high and you're depending upon malt enzymes alone, you might inactivate those enzymes and you'll still have problems. So the whole idea is you want fermentable sugar, you want to efficiently convert that starch into fermentable sugar, you have to go through gelatinization. So that's the first key step to efficient ethanol production. And I think yesterday we had a really great talk from Kevin Smith about efficiency in ethanol production. This is the first step to get there. I can look down here too. So what is gelatinization? Gelatinization is the first step here. And it's strictly, is that moving there or is that me? I had too much to drink at lunch, I guess. No, they stopped giving out the samples. We're on campus, come on. So gelatinization is strictly a water and heat function. There's no enzymes at that part, okay? Once starch is gelatinized, you've got your amylose and amylopectin in those starch granules. Once the starch is gelatinized, and these are, the granule bursts open, releases those starches, then your alpha amylase, you go into the liquefaction. This is where enzymes come into place. These two are very closely linked. Gelatinization has to come first, but there's an overlap between gelatinization and liquefaction. Conversion takes place afterwards. It can take place at the same time, or you can do that in your fermenter. So your malt alpha amylase and especially beta amylase are very heat sensitive. So that's where you need to be careful if you're depending strictly upon malt alpha amylase for your liquefaction and conversion. Starch, when we look at it, native starch, so that's in a plant, it's a crystalline form. And if you look at it under polarized light in a microscope, you'll see this pattern, which they call a Maltese cross or birefringence. As you start to heat up the starch in your cook, the starch granules will start to absorb water and swell. And eventually, we say they burst open, but you can see here by the photographs, they don't really burst like a balloon. They kind of become distorted, deformed, and then finally release the starch inside. If you're here looking at this, comparing the temperature and the viscosity, viscosity is one of the key features of gelatinization. So as you heat up your cook, this is just an individual starch granule here. You'll see that the viscosity is starting to increase in the solution there. And this, I suppose, is supposed to be the birefringence or Maltese cross. So that granule is absorbing water and absorbing water, finally gets so big that it bursts. It's releasing the starch inside, the amylose and amylopectin, and there's a decrease in viscosity. And so what's happening here is, I imagine it like you have a 5-gallon bucket of water and you put spaghetti in there, and as you stir that around, the spaghetti's flowing in the path of the water, right? So you get all the starch there. That's your decrease in viscosity. But in your cereal grains, in all your cereal grains, you have small starch granules and large starch granules. So this is just one starch granule. And they all start to gelatinize at a slightly different temperature. So that's your temperature range. The large granules are going to gelatinize first. The small starch granules gelatinize much later. So this is what's giving you that range on any one particular starch you have. But you're buying starch all the time, so it's going to vary quite a bit. And that's where this gelatinization range can fluctuate quite a bit. There's a lot of variability. So you've got variability in your incoming raw material, but you need to get a specific amount of fermentable sugar because you need to have a specific amount of ethanol at the end of fermentation, and you're expecting to fill so many barrels at the end of distillation. So you say to yourself, well, that's good. Andrew just told me about variability. I'm going to go to my trusted source called Google, and I'm going to look up gelatinization of any starch. Now, this particular case I'm going to show you deals with rye, but you can go and look later. These temperature ranges are all over the place. They vary quite a bit. Now, it's not to say that they're wrong or incorrect, but depending upon the variety of material that was used, the method that was used, the year in which it was done, you can get all of these different variables. So each starch has its own gelatinization temperature, and they're not going to be consistent. So when you go back to work or go home tonight, you have to ask yourself, is your mash temperature either high enough or is it the correct mash temperature? Because it could actually decrease too. And if you can gelatinize at a lower temperature, then you can save on energy as well. So you don't need to heat as much. The bottom's chopped off here a bit, but anyway, let's see if that, nope. There we go. Variability. The primary drivers here, of course, variety. There's different varieties of corn, rye, wheat, and barley. I'm talking either barley or malted barley. The year, the growing region, the growing conditions. That could be the weather, can also be any application of fertilizer or nitrogen or other applications. And especially more frequently now is drought. And I came across this map here about drought. Drought, which is particularly heat stress and moisture stress, increases gelatinization temperature. And we're seeing drought occurring globally more frequently. We had back in Western US and Canada, 2021 was one of the worst years in 100 years as far as drought. And we did see higher gelatinization temperatures in the malt. 2022 in Europe was very bad. They had drought conditions there too. And we're importing a lot of rye from Europe, especially Germany and Sweden. And we saw problems with that as well. So all of these affect the gelatinization temperature of the cereal grains. It drives that variability, and you don't know what that is. It's not listed on any certificate of analysis. So how do you figure this out? In our lab, in our applications lab, we have instrumentation, and it's out there. The one that we use in particular is called a rapid viscoanalyzer. There are a few other instruments, and you're not specifically measuring for gelatinization, but we're looking at the change in viscosity, and I'll walk you through this. during the different phases of gelatinization of the grain. So what we do is we take a very small portion of the grain, we grind it up really fine, 6 grams of flour in 24 grams of water. We put it in a little beaker and we're heating it. So this red line is your heating curve. We're heating at a constant rate of 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit per minute. We start down around 115, 120 degrees, and we increase it up to about 205 and hold it there. And there's a little stir in there, and we're maintaining a constant rotational speed. As the water, the solution heats up, we're going to start to see that the starch granules absorb water and swell, and that means there's an increase in viscosity, and we call that the pasting temperature. So you have to go up to your temperature line and over. For this particular sample, it was 126 degrees was pasting. Now, as we continue to heat, and all those starch granules, now you're talking about millions and millions of starch granules, they're all swelling and increasing viscosity until we reach a peak point, and then you have to drop down here to the temperature line and over here. And you can see that the peak temperature was 151 degrees. That's where you need to be to fully gelatinize all the starch in this sample. It's not down here. This is where all the starch is fully gelatinized. And as those starch granules burst open and release the amylose and amylopectin, that viscosity reduces. There's no enzymes in here. This is just starch and water. So, this is an instrument. They are available. I don't think it's very simple. I've asked around for you to take a sample and send it off to a lab and say, can you give me gelatinization temperature? It's a rapid viscoanalyzer, but not that common. We do this in our applications lab whenever customers come to us and they're looking for some help in optimizing their process. There's so much variability now that we have to do this first. What you could do is the old-fashioned way with the iodine check. An iodine solution, you take some of your mash and you strain it, liquid only, cool it down to room temperature, you put a drop of iodine in there. If there's starch, it turns dark blue or black. That's a middle school or junior high experiment. We've all done that. If there's no more starch in there, and this is really liquefaction, but if you've fully liquefied it, then you've certainly gelatinized the starch. There's no change in color when you put the iodine in there. That's iodine negative. You've gelatinized all the starch there. So this would probably be a very good go, no-go solution that you can use on your production floor. So we come to a case study. We had a customer come to us with rye, and we took a sample, and we went ahead and did the RVA analysis. And so we can see here, I put in, this is their set point. This is their recipe. We're mashing it 149 malt and rye. Now, if you go back to your reference tables, you would say, hey, that's pretty good. I know I'm going to gelatinize malt starch at 149, and according to these tables, that should be good enough for rye. Well, we come to find out that the peak temperature here on the rye is actually up here, 162 Fahrenheit. We still have pasting temperature. That's the start of gelatinization, but we haven't fully gelatinized until we get up to 162 degrees Fahrenheit. We went ahead anyway, and we did the trial. We'll go forward and bring it back. There you go. 95 rye. We'll come back to pH later. We've added some alpha amylase here, and we have a control with malt only. Now, it seems like there's duplicate or triplicate here because we also added some glucoamylase afterwards, after this gelatinization and liquefaction. So it's not part of what we're doing here. But if you look, even after 30 minutes, we still have this brown color iodine reaction. And this is a test we do on all of our mashing trials for brewing or distilling. So our lab technicians are quite well versed and they do this all the time. To me, that was a red flag. It should not take you 30 minutes and you still haven't reached iodine negative. You still don't have this. You have it here with commercial enzymes added, but that's still at 10 to 20 minutes. So something's not right. We looked at that and said, you're mashing in at 149.65. The RVA analysis showed us that gelatinization, the peak temperature was really much higher. Let's go back and do this over again. When we went back to do it over again, we had, with the commercial alpha amylase, we were okay. So iodine negative within 0 to 5 minutes, you could say maybe 10 with this particular one. This is where you want to be. In your cooker, you want iodine negative. You want to be fully gelatinized and liquefied in up to 10 minutes. The rest of the time in the cooker is to develop those fermentable sugars. So that's that third step that I mentioned. That's your conversion or your saccharification. We still have a problem up here. This really shouldn't be. If you remember, we're at 4.9 pH and it's malt only. That pH is too low. Alpha amylase in malt needs somewhere around 5.4 to 5.6. And if you get outside of that optimum range, the alpha amylase is going to struggle. So you have to keep two things in mind when you're using enzymes, any enzyme. It's temperature and it's pH. And a lot of times distillers are adding backset or slop, stillage, they're adding citric acid or phosphoric, and they're not paying attention to the pH. You have to keep that in mind. So this is the bonus for everybody who's attended today, because it's not going to be on the slides that you get at home. No, I'm just kidding. It's all going to be there. pH. Somebody in the previous session said, this is my favorite slide. This is one of my favorite slides because it's a beautiful representation of what happens with pH change in your mash. And you get just this wonderful shape here. We took corn as is, and that's about right. We're 6.1 pH, very high viscosity. There's no enzyme added here. And that's around 10,000. So when your operators come in and say the cooker looks like peanut butter, there's no alpha amylase in there. You got a problem. We said, okay, let's add some alpha amylase in here. We want to reduce the viscosity. We want to increase yield. And we started at 5.0 and 5.1. That's right up here. So it's still a very thick mash. Again, this is just 6 grams of flour and 24 grams of water. And then we said, okay, let's adjust the pH, but not so low this time. Let's look at 5.2, 5.3, and 5.6. This happens to be where your malt alpha amylase is going to work best as well. And you can see the viscosity dropped significantly. The pasting temperature is the same. That's the temperature here where gelatinization starts, where those starch granules are starting to absorb water. But the peak temperature, where you're fully gelatinized, that's this curve here, that temperature is coming down, right? So potentially there's a savings on energy. And the time to get to that peak temperature is coming down here too, about 5 minutes when you get down here. Somewhere around here is where you want to be as far as viscosity. That's a really significant difference between these curves and that curve up there. Now, a little secret that the peak temperature is really not changing, but as the starch granules are absorbing that water, they also have enzymes mixed in there as well. So those enzymes are being absorbed, taken up by the starch granules as they expand. And as that starch is losing its crystallinity, that birefringence is going away, the alpha amylase is able to get in there right away and break down and hydrolyze the starch that's in there. And that gives the appearance of a very fast reaction here. And it is, on a practical basis, a very fast reaction. And it is saving time and it's saving energy. So this is pH. Pay attention to your pH. And temperature. Pay attention to the temperature of the gelatinization in your starch. It's varying all the time. And so you have to make adjustments for that. And when you do make adjustments, you have to think about the other implications in the mash. And that's it. Except the wrap up, right? So remember, gelatinization temperature is a range, right? It's not one single fixed point. I think that's mostly what I come across all the time. I need to get to this one temperature. Well, if it's high enough, it's good temperature, but it's taking place over a range, and that gelatinization range is going to vary. Drought, unfortunately, I think is going to be more frequent, so that means your incoming raw materials are going to be affected by that. And you need to make adjustments to your cooker temperature if you want to fully gelatinize that starch. If you want to get the full amount of fermentable sugar, you need to gelatinize. And there's no no fermentation without gelatinization. That's really an important first step. And if you do need to adjust your temperature too high or adjust it upward, keep in mind what that means for enzymes. Finally then, I mentioned who is IFF, International Flavors and Fragrances. I think it might be unfamiliar to some people in the room. And Gusmer Enterprises is our distributor. So we're sold through distributors. And now that's it. Thank you very much.
For more information, go to gusmerenterprises.com. Click on Contact Your Rep on the top menu and then choose your state. The technical sales representative in your region will then be selected. Gusmer Enterprises, service with knowledge since 1924.